On behalf of the State Higher Education Executive Officers and the Association of American Colleges and Universities, I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the Multi-State Collaborative to Advanced Learning Outcomes Assessment, the MSC, a project involving 9 states, the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, and the Association of American Colleges and Universities. Connecticut, Indiana, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Missouri, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Utah are collaborating to develop and pilot test a model for state system learning outcomes assessment that is rooted in campus and multi-campus collaboration, focused on authentic student work, and useful to faculty for improving teaching and curricula. I'm Chris Ott, and I'll be your SHIO webinar operator for this presentation. Before I hand it over to our presenters, please allow me to cover a few housekeeping items. Time will be provided for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. You should see a primary presentation window on your screen, as well as a selection of windows on the right-hand side. One of those windows should say Q&A. This is where you can type any questions during or at the end of the presentation. To ask a question at any time, just type it into the small white box at the bottom of the Q&A window. After typing your question, press Enter, and your question will be submitted to all presenters. Questions will appear in a queue in the order in which they are received. The presenters will respond to as many questions as possible during the Q&A period at the end of the webinar using the audio system so that everyone can hear the answers. If you ask a technical question about the webinar itself during the presentation, I may be able to respond to you directly by text through the same system. To help us gauge the effectiveness of our webinars, we're trying to also get an accurate count of our participants. If you're sharing this webinar with someone else using a single connection, would you please let us know by sending us a note in that Q&A window indicating how many people are joining you? Thank you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters today, Terry Rhodes, Julie Carnahan, Bonnie Orcutt, and Ashley Finney. Julie?
Thanks, Chris. This is Julie Carnahan. I'm a senior associate at SHIO, and the first thing I'd like to do is to welcome all of you to this webinar. SHIO is so excited to be part of this collaborative and in partnership with AAC&U. It's a very exciting initiative that has really never happened in this country before. Some of the work we're doing is brand new, it's challenging, it's exciting, and we're very glad that all of you are at least here to listen to what this project is all about. So in addition to Terry Rhodes, who is a great partner we are working with, we have additional people on the line who you may not hear from until you start to ask questions that neither Terry nor I can answer. And the people we have backing us up are Ashley Finney, who is a Senior Director of Assessment and Research at AAC&U, and Bonnie Orcutt, who is Director of Learning, Outcomes Assessment, and Academic Policy at the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education. And Bonnie also plays the role as chair of the pilot study team for the Multi-State Collaborative. The two of them know all the detail about the pilot study, sampling, assignment design, etc. So Terry and I, when we see your questions coming our way, will defer to them because we know we have confidence that they can answer them. Terry?
Thank you, Julie. And this is Terry Rhodes, and let me also extend my welcome and thanks to all of you for joining us on this webinar, where we are going to try to give you an overview of the entire project that we are engaged with together. AAC&U, I think as most of you may be aware, is an institutional association, so we have colleges and universities from all sectors of higher education who are members of our association and who are also committing themselves to trying to provide a liberal education for all students who are represented and who attend the multitude and variety of institutions that make up our 1,300 plus members. It is a philosophy of learning, really, that is geared toward trying to empower and prepare our students to be able to deal with those complex, unscripted kinds of problems that one encounters in a diverse world that is rapidly changing. And in order to do that, we stress the importance of a broad range of learning outcomes that go beyond the simple ability to write or to speak, although those aren't simple abilities, but rather also include dealing with diverse others, being able to work as teams of individuals and groups, to be able to engage in ethical behavior, to integrate one's learning as new information implodes and bombards us and becomes important for the changing environment in which we live. And we support our institutions in trying to increase their ability to meet the demands for a better educated, more of our citizenry to be more highly educated, but at the same time very much committed to ensuring that that education that our students do receive, regardless of the degree or the credential they're pursuing, that it is a high quality degree with the learning that indeed prepares them for these kinds of challenges across this set of outcomes. And we believe very strongly that the best way for us to know whether our students, and for our students to know that they are achieving the levels of learning that they need, is through the work that we actually ask them to engage in our classes and in our co-curriculum, and as they strive to make connections between their lives outside of the academy and what they experience here. So we're also very delighted to be able to partner with SHIO in this endeavor. Julie?
Thanks, Terry. So in case you're not familiar with SHIO, it stands for State Higher Education Executive Officers Association. And what that title means is that we are a membership organization that represents the executive directors of public higher education. We represent 57 of them, which means that some of your states need to have two. Some states, actually Michigan and California, do not have a SHIO, but there are 57 that we represent. And what that means in terms of state leadership is SHIO is an advocate for state policy leadership. We're a liaison between states and the federal government. We're a vehicle for learning and collaborating with peers. We're a source of information and analysis on educational and public policy issues. And we emphasize success. The way we got involved in this project was really due to one of our members, Richard Freeland, who is the Commissioner of Higher Education in Massachusetts, was actually doing this kind of work in Massachusetts as part of the Vision Project. And Richard came to the president of SHIO and said, I think there's so much value in the work we're doing on assessment of learning outcomes. We would love to see some other states join us in our work. And so it was Richard Freeland's idea and his enthusiasm that really brought SHIO into this work. So I just wanted to give that nod to Richard Freeland, because without his vision, through his Vision Project and the work they were doing in Massachusetts, I'm not sure SHIO would be part of this wonderful project. So how we got here, the purpose and vision for the Multi-State Collaborative, in addition to Richard's vision, we heard from members across the country that the dialogue was currently focused on access and completion. And there was a concern that there was too much focus on counting numbers of degrees and certificates, and not enough focus on what that degree actually meant and what it meant a student could do with a degree in terms of their skills and abilities to enter the job market or graduate school or deal with other aspects of their life. And so from many conversations with our members, we realized how important it was not to totally turn our backs on the completion agenda, but really to enhance the dialogue, to change the conversation, to focus not only on completion, not only on access, but also on quality, and most importantly, on success of our students. And so that's really what this project is all about. We're changing the dialogue we're having in this country about what a degree means, what it means, what higher education means, what quality means. the challenge in generating evidence to meet the vision. Many of our members have talked about that existing assessment methods that we use, that we rely on in states, that our members rely on to talk to their legislators about students in their states, are grades, standardized tests, student surveys, and these are inadequate to accurately gauge and consistently share information about important college-level learning outcomes, including what students know, understand, and how they apply their knowledge. What we were hearing is the business community in many of our states and legislators were saying, while your students may have degrees, they may have GPAs of 4 or more, they may be brilliant in terms of standardized tests, but they're not meeting our needs in our communities, in our businesses, in our local establishments. And so there was a disconnect, and that's what this project is all about, to look at that disconnect and to look at learning outcomes. Harry?
Okay. Julie has been outlining the vision that brought us to this collaborative. And what does it take, though, in order to try to achieve that vision? And what we know is that faculty and student and academic affairs professionals at our institutions create sets of curricula, co-curricula, and expectations for what that student learning needs to be. And it is manifested in the kinds of assignments and the kinds of activities that we engage our students with during the time that they are with us. But as Julie pointed out, we need to be able to build more clearly the kind of evidence that our faculty and the other academic and student affairs professionals say that they're looking for and trying to help our students gain, that have been confirmed by employers through surveys and focus groups that have been conducted, that they are looking for and expecting from our graduates. And so in order to build this richer, more robust evidentiary base, what we need in terms of being able to achieve this vision, we're positing in our model for this project, is that we should be relying upon the direct assessment of student learning rather than a survey or a self-report. And so we need to look at and focus our attention on what students are actually able to do. And to do that, the best way to get that information and that kind of evidence is through what we're already asking students to do. So it isn't something we have to do more of. It really is something that we need to focus on, the actual assignments and activities that students use to demonstrate their learning. For a grade, it also can be used to demonstrate their learning on the set of outcomes that we are saying are important and that employers are echoing. The other value of this kind of approach, we firmly believe, and there's evidence emerging to support, is that it really helps students understand why we're asking them to do what we ask them to do, and that the real value of their demonstrations of their learning is not necessarily the letter grade that may be obtained, but rather what it is equipping them to do and the capacities that it's beginning to build with them, and that they have an understanding of what they're actually able to do through that best work that they're supplying to us. This clearly then puts faculty at the center of the judgments and the work and the learning, which is exactly what we think needs to happen. It's exactly why we have faculty, and here we do indeed use that term to include student affairs and academic professionals on our institutions. That's why they're there, and that's what they're engaged in on a day-to-day basis. The notion of being able to engage in this work, the statewide collaboration, both within and across states, is the realization that our students don't just start at a single institution and stay there the entirety of their academic and educational careers, but that they're moving about. They're moving from institution to institution to meet the needs that they have for their own educational goals. And so the ability to be able to move from our work, whether it be a single class, a single institution, to a state or even a state collaborative makes so much sense in the world in which we live and that our students are existing. One of the key parts of this model is indeed the creation of a database where institutions and states are going to be able to sample the work, the authentic work that their students are doing on their campuses around specific outcomes, and to put those artifacts, those representations of their learning in whatever mode they're happening, to be able to have some type of common or shared ability to look at that work and make a judgment about the level and the quality of that learning, to get a sense beyond our own particular institution, our own particular lens, to get some validation, to get some additional ability to look at the level of learning that our students are achieving, to create a landscape across an institution, a state, or across multiple states for what the learning strengths and the learning landscape looks like for all of our students. So that's the model, or the what we need to do, we believe, in order to achieve this vision. What we're engaged in now is a pilot of that vision and the model that for action that I was just describing. So what I've talked about is an overall model and approach and vision. And now what I want to briefly do is walk through how this plays out in this pilot year that those of you who are on this call will be engaged with. In terms of a direct assessment across a set of learning outcomes, for the purposes of the pilot, we're only going to focus on 3 learning outcomes. 2 that are going to be central for this work are written communication and quantitative literacy, and institutions and states participating in the project have the opportunity to also focus on and look at critical thinking as 3 outcomes that are possible for them to collect artifacts and to focus on in terms of the learning. These are clearly associated with AAC&U's set of essential learning outcomes, which encompasses 16. And so for the purposes of the pilot, we'll focus on 3. In terms of the demonstration of learning, we're looking at a range of student work products. We will look at the value rubrics as the common standards or the common language and expectations for learning that will be shared across the institutions and across the states. In order to engage in this work, we have to have some type of shared language and shared expectation for what the learning looks like. And this will allow us to create some baselines to be able to talk across and among institutions and states about the work that students are indeed presenting and how it exemplifies and demonstrates the learning in those outcome areas that we're focused on. We also, in the model, argue about multiple points throughout a student's time. And in the pilot, we're going to be not able initially to focus on all of that, but it's not the one-off test that we have been familiar with. Student learning is something that happens over time. Sometimes you will move forward rapidly, sometimes you fall back as you move into a new area for learning. Your learning accelerates or decelerates. And so part of what we're about in terms of the vision is to try to capture that multiple points at which students would be able to demonstrate their learning, and we can see the movement both forward and to the side that may be occurring. We're also not going to be able in this model to look at all of the work that students do for all of their students, more necessarily all of the institutions, et cetera, but rather we're going to be sampling and in some types of representative sample. So there's a lot of work going into sampling frameworks, et cetera. But again, it's an effort to try to create this landscape this notion of what the learning looks like on a broader scale across institutions and across states. And then finally, that database that I mentioned that will allow us to both collect evidence, allow others to see it so that they can make judgments about it, that will help corroborate and substantiate the judgments that individuals, campuses, and states are making, but also to allow individual campuses, if they so choose, to be able to sample sufficient artifacts to be able to do greater analysis among subpopulations within their own institutions. And so the model is playing out on all of those levels. And as I said, that is our hope for the overall project, is to be able to begin to show how we can address all of those aspects in their full capacity. But in the pilot year, the year that we are currently in, the notion about direct assessment, as I said, is going to be restricted. So we won't be looking at all of the outcomes. We'll only be looking at written communication, quantitative literacy, critical thinking. In terms of the demonstration of that learning, exemplifies a range of work products. We're going to be focusing on a subset of that, sampling around assignments that will have some guidelines, but we're targeting a minimum of 75 to 100 work products per outcome. Again, we're trying to test and to see if this is possible. What are the issues in trying to do this? And can we indeed collect, look at, use student work to be able to address the learning in these outcomes? So the pilot is really this proof of concept. For the assessment at multiple points, we're not going to be able to do that in the pilot, so that we're going to be, in our sample of students, looking for those who have completed 75% of the total number of credits required to graduate, or either at an associate level or at a baccalaureate level. Again, it's to see what it looks like at that point. Can we do it? What are the issues that we have in terms of the sampling and the collection of work? The representative sample of states and institutions, as we stated at the outset, we have 9 states. These were states that were willing to do this and wanted to and saw value in this approach. And we have approximately 70 public institutions, 2- and 4-year, that will be participating in the multi-state through their state SHIO organizations and their own, the 9 states that are listed here. In addition, AAC&U will be working with a set of private institutions that represent part of our membership, but they won't be part of the multi-state. But we wanted to make sure that private institutions, independent institutions, were included in being able to test out the model and the processes that we're putting in place to try to achieve this kind of learning and learning assessment. And then finally, in terms of the management system, we have chosen a management system. Essentially, it is a database that all of the institutions and all of the states will be using for the purposes of collecting, scoring, and analyzing the results of the work that will be going on during these states. So that gives you a sense of what the model is, the vision is for the entire overall project, and in how we have tried to define it and narrow it in the pilot year to make it something that we can test out these ideas and these processes and come up with something that is doable and allows people to come into this, we hope, in a very manageable way. Julie?
Thanks, Terry. So this slide again depicts the 9 states that are participating in the pilot study year. We arrived at these 9 states over a period of about 2.5 years. We had a meeting here in Boulder over 2 years ago with 18 states and AAC&U staff to talk about this idea of measuring learning outcomes. Those 18 states went back to their states after our meeting and talked to their institutions. The institutional folks, the the chief academic officers talked to their faculty, and we ended up with 9 states volunteering. And those states that volunteered were those states who had institutions that were interested in participating in this project, and more importantly, faculty that were already engaged and very interested in participating in this project, and in many cases, in many of these states, had quite a bit of experience on assessment and committed to looking at student outcomes. The project is organized with a steering committee, which includes state point persons from each state, plus representatives from SHIO and AAC&U. And then in each state, at each of the 70 institutions, there is an institution point person who has a big responsibility to oversee where most of the work for this project gets done, which is at the institution and by faculty. So institution point persons are overseeing working with faculty and assessment folks on those campuses. And we also have a pilot study team that actually is carrying a great deal of the work. That consists of reps from each of the 9 states and from SHIO and AAC&U. And I do want to mention that many of these states that are involved in the pilot study, they've been involved in assessment for some time. Earlier I mentioned the Vision Project in Massachusetts. This is Massachusetts' second pilot study measuring learning outcomes. We're learning a lot from what they learned the first year. It's great to have Massachusetts as part of this collaboration because we're learning quite a bit from what they learned the first go-round. Missouri has had institution-based assessment for many years. It was mandated by their legislature, and so they've been having conversations on these topics for many years in their institutions, and faculty have a lot of experience that they bring to the table. Indiana, Kentucky, Oregon, Utah are all LEAP states. Again, quite a bit of experience in these states. Faculty have been doing this kind of work for years, and it's great to have their expertise at the table as well. We have a number of states with local initiatives. Oregon is one of those. Oregon started doing this work with the Oregon Transfer Project and actually has a statewide quality collaborative project going on as well. So the multi-state model seeks to draw from and satisfy a number of assessment needs. It is a collaboration, but we recognize that all of our states have different issues going on in their states. We can learn from each other on our similarities, and also we can learn quite a bit from our differences, and that's what we hope to learn from the pilot study project. Terry?
Thank you, Julie. And so this is about direct assessment of student learning and the notion that a one-off snapshot test was not a very good, or at least useful, complete representation of student learning. And the measurement or the tool that was decided on and that all of these states committed to was the use of the value rubrics. And part of the reason for that is what is partially depicted here, which is since the time that we have been trying to track people accessing these rubrics from our website, which was in the summer of 2010, you can see the growth in the number of times people have accessed these pages and the rubrics and been examining them. These are not duplicative, but indeed represent distinct individuals coming to the site and looking at the rubrics. And so it seemed like they were meeting the needs, or at least piquing the interest of people on our campuses, both administrators and faculty, for a useful measure that gave them a more robust and complete picture of learning in the various outcome areas. In addition, we've been looking at the types of institutions that have been accessing the rubrics. And again, this chart just simply gives you a sense of uh, what kinds of institutions have been coming. And you'll see that most of them are regionally accredited, but we also have a substantial number of international institutions that have shown an interest in the rubrics, and we do know that the value rubrics are being used in Japan, Hong Kong, China, Australia, the Middle East, and in the Americas. The types of institutions by Carnegie classification, you see that all types of Carnegie institutions are also looking at the rubrics, and we know from experience using them in various capacities. Not all of these institutions are using them institution-wide. Many of them are programmatically based or in a particular college or single college within a university, but there's broad types of interest and representation among those who are using them. And it does cover all U.S. states and territories. Some higher ed consortia, there are consortia of institutions that are coming together already using the value rubrics to address the levels of learning because they are sharing students across institutions and wanting to do and have a better sense of they're meeting the needs of students to be successful as they move from place to place. And we've also seen interest on the part of K-12 schools and systems that as they are addressing their own efforts at trying to raise the level of student performance in key learning outcome areas, that they are looking to make sure that what they're doing is aligned with what's happening in higher education. And indeed, the rubrics are an indicator of that and one of the ways in which they're trying to line up what they're doing with what is happening in higher ed. And so it made sense for the value rubrics to become the common language and the common framework and set of expectations that would be used across the institutions in the states. Julie?
So this slide, a pilot study timeline and milestones, is a very general depiction of our timeline. It really doesn't do justice to the work going on behind the scenes. I realize in looking at it, it reminds me of our marquee announcing a theater production on a certain date, which really doesn't tell you what's going on behind the scenes. So given that we are doing much more than is listed on this list, but this gives you a pretty general idea of what our timeline is. So phase 1 of the pilot study is currently underway. We have developed protocols, templates, and guidelines for selecting pilot campuses. We have identified campuses and state and campus liaisons. We have developed campus plans. We are in the process of soliciting campus plans for the collection of artifacts. We have developed the instructions for the campuses to develop their plans. We have finished that. And we are engaged in faculty development workshops and summits with many more to happen in the future. In the fall of 2014, and this is when I break out into a cold sweat, because that's the actual collection, coding, and uploading of artifacts. Again, a targeted minimum of 75 to 100 student artifacts per outcome per institution. And in the fall, we'll also be continuing faculty development to support phase 2 of the pilot study. Phase 2 of the pilot study starts in January 2015. It is contingent upon additional funding, and phase 2 includes the scoring of artifacts at state and multi-state levels, as well as the analysis of the data. And with that, this page includes a list of additional webinars that we mentioned previously. This is the last webinar introducing you to the Multi-State Collaborative. However, this webinar will be recorded and on the MSC website. But we have scheduled in the near future 2 pilot study overview webinars and 2 assignment design webinars, and we are planning some additional webinars as well, which we'll put out on the SHIO website as soon as we get those dates nailed down. And without further ado, we're now open to questions. Any questions that you might have about this webinar or about the Multi-State Collaborative?
And Julie, if I can just add while people are
Sure.
thinking of their questions and typing them in, the two pilot study webinars, it will be a repeat of the same one, so there's no need to attend both of them. They will be a repeat of the same information. Same is true for the assignment one. So it's not a 1-2, but it's an opportunity to repeat both of those webinars a second time so that people could fit them into their schedules and be able to, in a live context, ask questions. I'd also like to, on behalf of SHIO and AAC&U, thank the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which have indeed underwritten our pilot year project, and we're hoping to continue their interest into the second phase of this project, which they seem to be very excited about.
Thanks, Terry.
Other questions?
Questions, or Bonnie and or Ashley, do you have anything you'd like to say that we might have forgotten?
Hi, everyone. This is Ashley Finley, and I guess the one thing that we have also added to our extensive webinar list, so you can't fault us for trying to reach out as much as possible, at least virtually, is we've added a couple of sampling webinars as well. And I believe, and Bonnie can correct me, but I think we've pinned these down, and Becky Dolinsky, our capable project managers, also around too. But I believe we have these scheduled for May 21st and 22nd from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time.
That's correct, Ashley.
Okay.
And just this is Bonnie Orca, and to add to that, we're also in the process of trying to put together a webinar on the IRB and student consent around assessment.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks, Ashley. Any questions out there? Maybe the Q&A doesn't work, Chris.
Well, I see quite a few things in the Q&A box, Julie. If you don't, I'll just start.
Oh, I don't see any.
That's fine. I'll just start reading them to you.
Okay. Sorry. Yes, I don't see any.
That's okay. We have several requests. Will the PowerPoint be made available to webinar participants? And the answer is yes. It'll be on that shio.org/MSC website that you see on my screen, on your screen rather, along with a recording of this webinar. And then I'll just start at the bottom here and work my way up if none of you guys can see.
Oh,
these.
I can see them now.
Okay, great.
Okay. This is a question. This is for Bonnie or Ashley. Can you see these questions?
Yes.
Page 3. Do you want to respond to that one?
I actually can't see. This is Bonnie. I can't see the questions,
Okay.
so I'm not sure if I'm not. Oh, there they are. Okay. Page 3 of the sampling parameters. Let me look. Yes, that would be a typo.
Would be 2014. Is that right, Bonnie?
That's correct. Thank you, Dane, for catching that, so we can make that correction.
And it's also, just read the questions out loud if you would, please, because the participants can't see them at all.
So the question was on page 3 of our sampling parameters. We indicate or refer to fall 2015, and we're collecting and sampling in fall 2014.
We also have a couple of questions about the sampling procedures, and the first question was, is the targeted minimum of 75 to 100 artifacts mean per course? Actually, no, that's total per institution, and we are hoping that those...
Per outcome.
Per outcome, correct.
Per institution.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. And we're actually setting guidelines that it should be 10 artifacts per course. So at minimum, for example, we might have 10 faculty involved, that we pull 10 artifacts per course to make sure that we have a diversity of artifacts coming in. All the artifacts also don't need to be from the same assignment, again, given that you've got multiple faculty that you're wanting to engage, and that's why we're having an assignment design webinar. It's really about the intentionality of the assignment design to be respectful and have fidelity to the rubric. So that will be key there, but they certainly don't have to all come from the exact same assignment.
This is Julie. There's a question for Terry. Did you send information about the database protocols? I think that's a Terry question.
Yeah, the short answer is no, not yet. I mean, we have them, but we have been waiting to make sure that we had a formal agreement approved and in place before getting information out about the database, because we felt that there were some things that needed to happen first, and we needed to have that agreement in hand and finalized. And so we do now have that. We've just been able to get all of those pieces of it defined and approved, and so we will be getting information out shortly. But it is not out yet, but it will be coming, and it will be coming shortly.
There is another question. Will I be able to use the current assessments I'm using?
So, Terry, did you want to answer that, or would you like me to?
Well, why don't you go ahead, Bonnie? It's yeah, sort of an if, but anyway, yeah, go ahead.
So what's happening in the pilot study in the multi-state collaborative is that the assessment instrument we're using would be the value rubrics as our assessment tool, so that we have a common tool, but that doesn't impinge upon the assessment tools and the assessment programs that institutions are using or planning to use or put in place. What it does call for is for the assignment instructions or the design of your assignments be aligned with the value rubric, appropriate value rubric. So if we're looking at collecting student work to demonstrate written communication, then we want to reflect upon or look, is this an appropriate assignment for the student work to be submitted, in the sense that do the assignment instructions ask students or give students the opportunity to demonstrate the dimensions of written communication in our assessment tool or in our written communication value rubric. So that's what we're asking faculty who are going to be volunteering their assignment and their corresponding student work to look at, but it doesn't alter your institution or program's decision to use the value rubric as is, the value rubric modified, an institution rubric, or other kinds of assessment tools, direct or indirect measures in your own programs.
Bonnie, here's another one for you. As a faculty member at a participating institution, what would be one of the first steps that I would want to take in moving forward with the pilot?
So I think the first step for faculty, so as a faculty member myself on leave of absence, but when I was there and we were looking at participating, what I did and what we're asking faculty to do would be to think about the existing assignments that they have in some of the courses that they might be offering in the fall that have students that we're looking at. So as Terry referred to in the webinar, we're going to be collecting student work from those students that are nearing graduation. So if I'm offering a course in the fall as a faculty member, I might say, what assignment do I have in that course that I think might generate student work appropriate to be submitted for the pilot study? So it really, that first step is really to think about the courses that you might be offering that have students, and do you have assignments that would generate student work appropriate for assessment in the pilot study, assessment of written communication or quantitative literacy and or critical thinking. So I think that's really the first step, and you can begin with your existing assignment, although it's not to say that precludes you from creating an assignment if you so desired.
Thanks, Bonnie. Here's another one for you. Registration for fall classes won't be complete until right before classes begin. How should we identify courses with students who have completed 75% of their courses? I think I may be confused on how courses are identified for the pilot.
So I think that becomes one of the sampling questions that institutions are going to be grappling with. So registration may in fact be open all the way up through the fall, and then it becomes the sampling process by which your institution is chosen to follow. So some institutions might begin with courses. What are the courses where we have the percentage of students that we expect to be eligible in? So do we have, in 4 years, do we have capstones being offered in the fall that are likely to have lots of students nearing graduation enrolled? So you can identify those courses and then actually create the sample of those students pretty easily through your IR department in the fall after registration is completed. So you can implement that sampling process in September, but have it established prior to that point by identifying those courses that you expect the highest enrollment, and then identifying from there possibly the faculty and approaching faculty who might be willing to participate who are offering those courses. But institutions over the next month are going to be talking a lot about that sampling process, and that's why Ashley and I are going to be doing a much more specific webinar that will answer that question, I should say much more specifically about sampling processes and how to begin to deal with those issues of when registration closes, what happens when students are adding and dropping or withdraw halfway through the course. So how does that impact our sampling process? So those are really good questions that we're going to try to delve into in much more detail in the next webinar, or the sampling webinar.
But I hope this is Julie, delve into one more question right now that I think is also applicable to the pilot study webinar, Bonnie. Here's the question. To what extent is it likely that samples from 2-year schools are more likely to involve general education courses than those from 4-year schools?
Well, we think that's highly likely and probable, because 2-year institutions, and especially if it's an institution that is preparing students for transfer to a 4-year or a liberal arts 2-year, then we're expecting many of those students are completing their programs of general education at the 2-year institution, where majors are not so predominant. Most 2-years don't have majors; they may have programs. So I think that's highly likely, and that makes the sampling a little more difficult for 2-year colleges, because it's harder to identify where students are going to be in that last semester, or the semester where they're nearing graduation, because many are still taking those general education courses and they may be all over the place. So I think that presents a sampling challenge for 2 years that many 4-years aren't going to face.
Thank you. And there is one more question. I think it might be a Terry or Ashley question, but we'll see. Since the rubric is used at both 4-year and 2-year schools, is there agreement on how to use the levels within the rubric? Who wants it?
Terry, do you want to take that one?
I can, or it's up to you. You want to jump in? Okay, I'll do it. One of the things that is the case with the pilot year, or with the pilot study, is that it is really focused on once the student artifacts have been collected from all of the institutions, that we will have teams of faculty and other student and academic affairs professionals from our primarily from our participating institutions and states, who will indeed be using the rubrics to look at the work from all of the institutions across all of the states. And so at that point, we will be doing calibration sessions to indeed ensure that there is a level of acceptable agreement among the scoring individuals about how to use the rubric, what the understanding is of the levels of learning, the expectations for what the learning looks like, etc. We do know that many of the institutions, or at least several of the institutions, have already expressed to us their desire. They're either already using the rubrics or they have a desire to use the rubrics locally on their own campuses with their own students' work, to see how their faculty, through a norming and a calibration process there, may use the rubric to look at the work and to evaluate that, compares to the results that will emanate from this project scoring that will be done by faculty from the institutions and states across the entire project, looking at the work from all of those institutions across. And so there's not a need at the moment for us to be concerned about specific 2-year or 4-year institution faculty looking at that work and agreeing among their institutions or between their institutions how to use the rubric. The critical part for us in the pilot is indeed to have that done by the scorers who are going to be looking at the work across all of the states and institutions. And those indeed we will go through a norming process so that we do obtain the levels of agreement that statistically we're looking for to have reliable results. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that answers. But
yeah.
Ashley, you want to add?
I would just add quickly that, as the question rightly points out, that we do have 2- and 4-year institutions using the rubric and taking advantage of the developmental scale that's there. And those campuses have done those calibration sessions and have come to have some great results around reliability in coming to that agreement. So the training has to be done, but we're quite hopeful that agreement will be achieved. And I know we have one last question here, so I want to make sure we get to that.
Yes, I'll try and read this question correctly. There was a lot of reference in this webinar to what employers want. And although I feel that's a practical and important consideration, isn't the warrant there that the purpose of higher education is to prepare students for the workforce? Or am I misunderstanding the motives behind the project? Could you briefly summarize the impetus for the project? Will this project eventually open itself up to, and then I'm having trouble seeing that final line. Can anybody see it?
I can't.
Open itself up to other states. Will this project eventually open itself up to other states?
Yeah. I'd be glad to answer two.
Okay.
We hope to open this project up to other states. Yes. Terry, you want to try?
Yeah, and I'll address the first part. It mentioned, and I mentioned it.
I mentioned it. Yeah.
As well. I mean,
yeah.
It was, as she says, it was mentioned more than once.
Yes.
Part of the motivation behind the project, short answer is yes. We do want to prepare our students to be productive members of the workforce. But the real motivation behind the project was indeed to say, one, that faculty should be at the center of the judgments around student learning and the level of that learning across the range of outcomes that the faculty, and again, I'm using student and academic professionals included in that statement because there's agreement among them about the kinds of learning that our students need to be not only successful in the workforce, but successful as citizens, as successful as participants in a global community, to lead successful lives for personal enrichment. That That's our motivation, is to put faculty and their judgment at the center of talking about the levels of student learning that are needed and how our students are doing. And secondly, to put at the center of it the need for something more than a one-off snapshot picture of learning, and have that be the foundation to talk about what our students can do, and to move it back into exactly what we're asking our students to do as faculty and as other professionals at our higher education institutions. That we don't just do these things to do them, we're doing them because we feel that they are important in the preparation of our students for all of those capacities and in roles that they will be playing in their lives. We mention the employers simply because the employers are also saying they need and want the same set of things for the people that they're trying to hire. And yes, that is a piece of it. It is something that is very important to many of our students and their families, or those paying the bills. But our primary motivation was to say we think there's a better way for us to get the useful information we need both on our campuses and in our state and national arenas to talk about what our students are learning and the levels at which they are learning. So it's not the primary motivation, but it is indeed a part of it.
Thank you. And it looks like we've come to the end of our hour. Again, we want to thank you all for joining us today. It was a very interesting webinar in terms of your questions. I hope we answered them. If not, you will see at the beginning of this webinar on the first slide, you can email any one of the four of us with additional questions, or actually go to the SHIO website, and we would be glad to follow up with any other additional questions that you might have. Again, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.